Well, good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to welcome you onto this webinar where we're talking about how to do business in China in 2021 and beyond. My name's Oliver Jones. I'm the Chief Executive of Chayora. I'll say a little bit more about that later on, but we're a developer and operator of hyperscale data center campuses in mainland China. But I'm delighted to be co-hosting today's event with British Telecom and the British Chamber of Commerce in China. And my co-host today, here in Hong Kong with me, Phil Swallow. And Phil is the Regional Enterprise Director for AMEA. I think AMEA is Asia, Middle East and Africa, is that right? So most of the world, as far as I can see on that front, which is a good chunk of it. And we're also joined, and we'll be seeing Stephen in a moment, Stephen Lynch, who's the Managing Director of the British Chamber of Commerce. Stephen's up in Beijing, and going to be great to hear from him in a few moments' time. Now, our common denominator is that we're all British. We've all got a passion for China. And we've all been involved in this part of the world for really quite a long period of time. And I was just speaking to my two co-hosts a little bit earlier and added up that between us, we've got around 70 years of experience, which makes me certainly feel very, very old of doing business in mainland China over that period. And so what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to share some of the insight that we've gained over that period, and very importantly, apply it to the current world, the tricky world that we're living in at the moment of the international trade wars that we've seen and trade accords that we hope are coming. We've seen the challenges of COVID at the moment and a whole host of other things that we'll touch upon as we go through this in the course of the next hour or so. Now, let me just let you know what we're planning to cover on the agenda to start with. So I'm delighted that I'll pass in a few moments' time to Stephen Lynch, who will take us through from a BritCham point of view, a few perspectives on how China is presenting itself, particularly to British corporations today. I think, Stephen, you're going to say a little bit about the impacts of Brexit and what we need to cover from that perspective. And very importantly, what we want to be able to do is ensure that we cover the UK's focus on China in particular. After Stephen's run through his presentation, we then want to share our thoughts, and Phil and I will each share our thoughts in terms of how to solve the typical challenges that businesses who want to do business and trade with China are encountering. But we're going to particularly look at digital infrastructure and aspects of the legal parameters and some of the new cybersecurity laws that are emerging all over the world, but are particularly poignant at the moment. So some comments on that, and we'll take about 5 or 10 minutes running through there, after which I'll then tell you a little bit about a specific piece of digital infrastructure, something we're very proud of as Chayora, where we will, I'll show you a few images of one of the really large data centers that we've constructed and tell you about the context for how we're seeking to help international and premium domestic businesses succeed in the modern online world. And then lastly, for the back end 20-25 minutes, what we want to do is really just have a discussion between Stephen, Phil and myself, which will enable us to pick up on, we've had a host of questions that have come in from people before the webinar, but if any of you feel that there are any questions that come out of either Stephen's presentation or the points that Phil or I cover beforehand, do just drop them into the chat stream and we'll try and pick those up and give an honest opinion and a direct answer to those as we go through. So I think that's the objectives that we're trying to cover on that front. And if we can bring that all in the course of an hour, then I think we'll have done very well. Once again, it's a delight to be sharing the platform with the British Chamber of Commerce in China and with BT here in Hong Kong. And I hope we're going to have a really interesting next discussion coming forward. So without further ado, let me move on. And Stephen, if you'd like to take the floor, and we'd love to hear the thoughts from BritCham. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a delight to be here, and I think one of the things that Oliver just mentioned was Brexit and the implications of Brexit on British businesses here in China. And this comes actually to my presentation. When the referendum came out, the British Chamber of Commerce had to holistically change. We would no longer be represented in China by the European Union, and that allowed us to step up in regards to our lobby and advocacy, because no longer would that be done from the European Union. And that very much started us on a process around our position paper. And that's exactly what I'd like to do to present today is our UK business in China public position on China. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. In the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, I'm just going to quickly run through the position paper, which takes a public stance on China. But I think the crucial aspect to this paper is it's on the ground. It's voices here in China, in market. And I think sometimes there's a big disconnect between the realities of China, the perceptions outside the country, and what's truly happening in market. So, and I think that's actually very critical to mention is in regards to timelines. For the last 40 years, China has opened up and reformed. So it's absolutely not stood still for the last 40 years. And I think sometimes when we look at China, we think the market, the business environment has its challenges. But when we look back to where it's come from to where it is now, it's a very, very different business environment, and it's constantly changing. So this year is the anniversary of China joining the WTO. And it's an extremely different business environment from 20 years ago to 10 years ago to 5 years ago to 1 year ago. This is the most dynamic market on the planet, and it's constantly changing and evolving. And I think that's why this paper is so important, because it gives the realities from the ground. So as mentioned, this is a truly national view. This is taking in 650 members across the country, and that's from Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu. And again, different business sentiment in the different markets. So on the Pearl data, you'll obviously have more manufacturing. You sort of have the more government affairs up in Beijing. And now with the emergence of the Greater Bay Area, we're seeing a lot more traction taking place in the Guangdong area, especially between Hong Kong. So as mentioned, this is our third position paper that we've taken on China. And again, this came really about from the Brexit referendum. And this process has been driven for members, by members, and again, it really relates to businesses here in market. And I want to stress that quite a bit, and I'll come on to that in regards to some of the market access barriers. Because again, I think sometimes the perception outside the country doesn't actually match the dynamic, fast-moving nature of some of the issues, some of the opportunities, but also some of the barriers. So looking forward, what's been in this paper, we focus on 9 target sectors, some of the big sectors for British businesses here in China. You can see that on the left hand of your screen. But also, we also look at the 14 major challenges that are taking place here in market. Just to draw your attention, which I think is very important to today's session, the number one issue, which has been the number one issue for British businesses here in China for the last 3 years, has been cybersecurity and IT restrictions. And I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit later. But also one thing to mention is every time I speak to businesses outside the country, one of the biggest concerns they raise is intellectual property. You'll actually see that's not even the top 10 issues. This actually number 11 is intellectual property rights. It's not to say that there isn't issues, but actually the realities in market is your IP is a lot more protected than you think. So again, just to kind of give the nuances to in market to outside of the market. As we probably all know, COVID-19 has dominated 2020. It's completely dominated the sort of the near future, but this has been a period of navigating uncertainty. And I think despite COVID-19, we have seen operations pretty dramatically come back to some level of normality here in China. So our last position paper really looked at a tale of two halves. A COVID-19 that sort of ravaged China, and then suddenly a very, very quick economic recovery. So if we look at this year, we see some levels of optimism, we see some levels of caution. But I suppose the big things in this paper, and the big thing that's come out of China in the last year has been the rather dramatic economic recovery. We've seen it really has been a tale of two halves, and again we can see the strong level of the market coming through. Another thing to mention that we had earlier in the year is the 14th five-year plan, where we saw a lot of opening up and reform processes being put on the table, but also looking at some of the wider issues that we've all been facing is the geopolitical issues, specifically between China and the rest of the world. But if we take it from a UK lens, we've also seen how should I call this sort of thawing of relations. We previously had the golden era between UK and China. I think we're very firmly out of that now. And so we've seen sort of the geopolitical frictions taking place on many flashpoints. And that's obviously caused concern around the relationship. But just to double down, there has been strong economic growth, and I'll certainly come into that as well, and looking forward in some of the key areas where we can work together, the Greater Bay, the Belt and Road, as well as sustainability, with COP26 taking place in the UK, COP15 taking place in China, huge areas for collaboration. So I just kind of want to move us through into the actual trading relationship to put this into context. So despite a drop from 2019 to 2020, you will still see that there's a huge trade relationship between the UK and China. It currently sits at 78 billion pounds sterling. If we add in Hong Kong, for the second year in a row, it's over 100 billion pounds sterling between bilateral trade between the UK and China. So despite UK trade dropping globally around the world by 18%, it only dropped in China by about 7 to 8%, which is pretty dramatic and a great strength of the relationship, all things considered. I'd now just like to put this into context of where the China relationships sits globally. As you'll see, the European Union dominates the UK's trading relationship, but you'll see China sits in there at the third largest trading partner. It's the second largest trading partner outside the European Union, with a significant trade balance there. Now, when we break that down into, and we take out the European 27, we'll still see that China sits at number 3, just behind Germany. And again, year on year, it's continuing to grow. So this is a very, very significant trading relationship. The UK is looking to form free trade agreements with other countries, namely the European Union, the United States of America. That makes a lot of sense. But when we look at the ASEAN countries, Japan is on that list, which actually only sits at around 30 billion pounds sterling. The relationship that the UK has with China is extremely significant. And again, from our members here in market, there has been calls for a free trade agreement with China. And again, we can see some of the issues that have been dominating the relationship could be addressed through a free trade agreement. So moving forward, we pulse our members, we pulse the British businesses here in China. And despite a difficult year, there is extreme levels of optimism. Just under 50% of all British businesses in China are still optimistic. Some are moving into the neutral, but neutral or optimistic British businesses continue to invest. And this is all due to the market potential. It's been estimated by 2030, the middle class of China will grow to around 80 million people. 800 million people, sorry, I missed the naught there. But as you'll see, that the thing that attracts British businesses time and time again to this market is the market potential, and it's only growing. And again, I think the number that I've just presented, 800 million people in the middle income, middle class with disposable incomes, is a pretty phenomenal figure and a pretty phenomenal opportunity for British businesses here in China. And that's why we continue to see investment coming through the market. So I'd just like to take you through very, very quickly around our recommendations. Our recommendations to both the Chinese authorities, but also to the British authorities to push for a better trading relationship and a better trading investment relationship for the UK. Our recommendations last year, we really focused on market reforms. As mentioned, the biggest issue, the biggest singular market access issue for British businesses was cybersecurity and IT restrictions. We then had state-owned enterprises and competition with private investors, the liberalization of capital controls, and we wanted to keep the bilateral conversation open. And finally, just as we produced our report last year, the COVID pandemic was taking grip. So we really wanted to make sure that travel agreements and travel arrangements stayed open. So that's kind of looking back at where we were. Now I'd just like to kind of take us through to our key recommendations this year. Maybe surprisingly or unsurprisingly, our biggest recommendation to both the UK and to the Chinese is to enact a clear, consistent, safe and practical travel process between the UK and China. I think it's completely understandable that China has put in pretty dramatic COVID preventions, but what that has also meant is there is no longer any government-to-government interaction taking place. There's no longer people-to-people, and there's no longer business-to-business, because unfortunately people can't get into the country. And I think moving forward, that could be extremely problematic and damaging for the relationship moving forward. So while we are not saying that that people should bypass restrictions, COVID restrictions, or indeed quarantines, but there must be a way that we can get people to and from the country if we want the people to people, if we want further investment, and if we want further foreign direct investment. I know Phil and Oliver sitting up there in Hong Kong haven't been able to travel to China for the best part of 15 months. That's problematic to a business. And moving forward, that must be addressed if we're looking to increase engagement, increase in investment. Our second recommendation is very much in line with the first recommendation. If we want China to remain a global talent hub, we must encourage foreign direct investment. We must increase foreign nationals to live, to pay taxes, and to flourish in this country. At the moment, we actually have recently seen the latest China census, and foreign nationals in Beijing and in Shanghai have decreased dramatically. That was actually before the COVID pandemic took place. With COVID, there's been people trapped outside who cannot get back. So we've seen a continuing decrease in foreign nationals based here in China. And if we want this to be a global talent hub, if China wants this to be a pillar for development and innovation, we must encourage that. And there's a new individual income tax, which is coming into place next year. If that goes into effect, that could cause a further reduction in foreign nationals here in China. Our third recommendation is very much in line with our previous years, is to make sure that the implementation of market reform is across the board, across the country, implemented fairly. You'll see central policy, which sometimes is not correctly implemented in some of the regions. And again, that's extremely problematic for businesses to navigate this uncertainty, to navigate the issues that they face at a local level when a central government is saying something different. So again, we need further reforms, we need further implementation of certain market access policies. And I think our fourth recommendation is very much in line with our conversation today, and that's to the restrictions around cybersecurity and IT have been the most pressing concern for British businesses here in China over the past 3 years. And we've seen these challenges become even more dramatic due to COVID. Data localization and cross-border data transfer is actually the most difficult issue for British businesses. And we can see that from global operations. Companies want to invest, they want to further integrate into the global community with their research and development, their innovation, but they're being prohibited by cross-border data transfer. And again, that must be addressed if we're going to increase investment for British businesses here in China. We're looking to expand pilot zones. I'm sure we'll discuss this slightly later with the Greater Bay Area, but we've seen liberalization in the financial service sector in the Greater Bay Area. This is a huge opportunity, but we want this pilot scheme drawn out in the rest of the country. And finally, we want to make sure that there's a level playing field between state-owned enterprises and private firms. State-owned enterprises have dominated the Chinese economy for the last 20, 30 years, but they're not playing at a level playing field. And that must be addressed again if China is to move forward. So I've obviously discussed some of the sort of the major concerns, major issues for British businesses, but I think that's also critical to know. This is an incredible opportunity market, but it's not just the land of opportunity. There are certain issues that companies must navigate to realize their full potential here in China. So there is absolutely huge opportunities, but we must be clear-eyed when moving into China and when working with China and looking at the business environment. But one thing we look to send a strong message to the UK is this is absolutely a time for engagement. This is not a time to be pulling back from communications or indeed pulling back from opportunities, because they are here in China and they are with Chinese organizations going outbound as well. So just to let you know, we have presented this paper to Chinese authorities and British authorities to really push the China-UK opportunity and the UK-China relationship. The paper goes into lots of detail to lots of sectors. I really do encourage anyone with the China interest to dig into this. It is a valuable paper. And so with that, I think I will pass back to Oliver Hopefully I haven't taken too much of your time, but if there are any questions, please do scan our code to download the report, or please do get in contact with the British Chamber. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. I think it's a terrific run through, so much to cover in such a little period of time. But I think it's profound to be reminded about the scale of the trading relationship between China and the UK. And I think placing it as you did in the context against the EU and the US is something particularly notable. And we would certainly agree that the key here is absolutely about how we can help and facilitate people coming into China. So let's move on. I want to further introduce Phil Swallow. Phil, tell us a little bit about BT in China and how's this all working? Because at BT, a major trusted brand to many British businesses out there. Tell us a little bit about that and some of the typical challenges that your customers, our customers face when they're going into China. And I'll bounce back with some things afterwards on that one, but over to you.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much. Look, I thought what I'd try and do is to share with you, I mean, BT as a company had been in China for 25 years. But what we consciously made a decision to do, as Stephen was saying, the opportunity is vast. So we decided to make further investments. And when we make a big investment, you need to understand the challenges. You need to understand the challenges that we face. You need to understand the challenges that your customers face that you want to try and solve, right? So I thought I'd run those through. And we did a lot of work with Ernst & Young. We did a lot of work with the Department of Trade. And we interviewed a lot of people, a lot of business, British business, international business, and indeed businesses in China. And what they told us literally that there are 6 fundamental challenges that they need to address when considering going into China and when considering who to buy from, who to partner with, what they need to do to be successful. 3 of those I'm going to say were fundamental requirements, fundamental challenges, and 3 of those more influential, but certainly worth considering. So let me take you through those, and I won't take too long. Don't worry. The first one comes as no surprise, and again, Stephen mentioned it, is businesses need to understand local regulation. They want to and need to comply with local regulation, and they want to do business with companies that understand that. So in the technology, in the infrastructure space, it boils down to really understanding the China cybersecurity law, to understanding the data security law, which was recently ratified, and the personal information law as well, that at the moment is somewhat in draft. But there's significant requirements you need to know if you're going to be a critical information infrastructure provider. Yeah. You need to know the level of certification you'll need against MLPS. There's many things that you will need to know, and BT is not going to be the expert, and Phil Swallow definitely isn't going to be the expert, but you need to understand these, and you do need to engage with experts in China. There's plenty available, but what we do as a business is to make sure that we comply with the things that we need to comply with, right? And that then filters down to our customers. So it always comes out as top. The law and the regulations are grey and they're ever changing. But if you work with the right partners, there's no significant inhibitor to doing business in China. The second major one is that companies, as they move into China, decide to invest lots of money. They want to go into China with companies and partners that they trust and understand. They want to have global relationships that translate well into China. You want to be partnering with companies that understand China as a major market and an opportunity as you yourself decide to invest. So I think having that balance between being a global operator in our case and a local operator with significant presence is extremely important to our customers. One of the challenges they see that we can help them overcome. And the third one, and again, this was talked about, is to do with capital. So if you're investing a lot of money in China, you need to be spending money and earning money in the same jurisdiction. You don't want to be moving a lot of money in and out of China. So the ability for us to be able to bill locally, the ability of our partners to pay bills locally, for anyone wanting to invest, I think you'll be looking to spend your money where you earn it. And certainly that came across in these interviews that we did. So those were the 3 main fundamental factors that our customers told us they needed to address. and which we then decided to build our propositions and what we do in China on those challenges. But look, there's more, right? The influential ones that I mentioned. China is an extremely competitive market. Nobody goes into China thinking that the Western way of doing things is any different to the China way. In fact, it's probably way behind in many cases. So it's a very, very competitive marketplace. If you do business in China, you're going to have to do that at Chinese rates and very competitive rates. So in that way, BT decided to source locally and do everything that we do in China locally. And that resonates well, again, with our customers and what we try to do there. And we do business locally. I think that as you go into China, you deal with customers in China, you'll need to invest in customer service, you'll need to invest in your own infrastructure to support your customer base in China. There's no getting away from that as well. So it's really acting local. And the last point I was going to make was we have a very large FMCG customer there who said, BT, I really need your help to be able to influence and explain to my head office about the challenges in China and why I need to customize things that I do in China and why the way that things that maybe happen in the West are not quite as similar as happening in China itself. So there's that flexibility, that challenge of we like to do everything the same because as companies it makes it easier for us to deliver. But at the same time, I think we need to, and you need to consider what changes you make to the products and services you sell to address that, that local Chinese requirement as and when, because the opportunity is significant enough for you to do so, right? So I think those are the sort of the main 6 challenges that, that our customers told us they wanted to address in the infrastructure technology space, right? And that's a small component, I suppose, what companies consider when they're moving.
I think there's some brilliant points of guidance there that I think resonate really strongly for me. I want to pick up just on 2 to just add to that. I think that in my personal experience, my corporate experience in being in and out of China for the best part of 30 years or so, something like that, I would never assume that I know China. I've seen so many people say that after 30 years, I now understand one thing about China, and it's truly big. And I think that was attributed to a Financial Times journalist back in the 80s, but I haven't been able to trump it since that time. And actually, there's 2 points I want to draw on that. I think most often international businesses coming into China make a massive inaccurate assumption about the market. Firstly, they don't really get quite how big China is. And I'll give you some parallels with that in a moment. And the second is, as a consequence of that, they make an assumption that China is one market. And it absolutely isn't. 1.4 billion people, as people understand. But if you place that into context, and I often, when I'm giving presentations, I often ask people, how many cities can you name in China? Now, those of us who are involved in this can name quite a few cities. But actually, when you disaggregate China and you think about the knowledge there, 1.4 billion people is the same as all of North America. That's including Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And then add to that all now 27 nations of the European Union plus the United Kingdom. And then add to that the population of the former USSR. Then 10% on top. That's how big China is. Now, you wouldn't dream of looking at all of those countries and saying, well, this is how I address those markets. So I think, Phil, your point on there is understanding the scale and the opportunity. And what we often see is that people come into China and they'll either get it wrong and they'll fail, or they'll get it right, but they won't imagine how big it could be. And therefore, scalability is hugely important. So I think scale is one of the things I would always hasten people to consider, because believe the unbelievable, dream the biggest dream you can, and then add 10% is the China story. And then the other one that you mentioned, which is about thinking local and actually becoming local, because the skills and talents of the Chinese team members that we've got are profound. They're impressive. We can find terrific people in all of the markets. Yes, we will often need to calibrate and align in terms of customer expectations in some parts of the country at the customer service level, but make no bones about it. There are some brilliantly talented Chinese people out there wanting to work for some of the international customers, if you can persuade them that they're not going to make their $1 billion by going to work with Tencent in Shenzhen. So I think there are challenges on that. But so those are a couple of the points that I would think about. But let's segue a little bit into dropping onto the ground, because what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about, we talked about digital infrastructure and the cybersecurity aspect. Well, the Chayora business, and maybe you can put up a couple of slides just while I'm talking through this, that will give people a bit of an idea about what it is that we've been up to. But Chayora is a developer, investor, and operator of hyperscale data center campuses in mainland China. We have a major facility just outside Beijing that is being developed that will have 25,000 racks of data center capacity. What does that mean? That's about 500,000 servers in a development of which you can see here is the first building, a development that'll be about 250,000 square meters, 2.5 million square feet of gross floor area, just of data centers. And for those not familiar with data centers, they're like, the biggest supermarkets you can imagine, but no people, no food, just computers, stacked up, racks upon racks upon racks. And they're fascinating, expensive, complex environments. So our development there at the moment, we're thinking China scale. And China scale for us means just what I was talking about, thinking beyond where you might imagine and going a step beyond that. So we will be, through our business, with the support of our institutional investors, investing between $1 billion US and $1.5 billion on our Beijing campus. And we are now moving forward to setting up and building a similar, slightly smaller scale campus just out Shanghai, which will be the first of 2 Shanghai campuses. And the reason for that is that when you start to think about the market size that I mentioned before, if I disaggregate the market that we're in, that is the tri-state area around Beijing, Hebei, and Tianjin, that's about 130 to 140 million people. Shanghai is, the eastern region around Shanghai is just a nudge under 200 million people. And 200 million people, I explained to my American friends, that's just over half, well over half the population of the United States. And that's just one regional market in China. So building these large data centers, enabling the biggest and smartest hyperscale occupiers to come into China. And our goal as Chayora is to enable these organizations to come into China, and a little bit like staying in a first-class branded hotel where we have knowledge about what it's going to be like and assured quality. And when you get there, it feels like home. It works the same as your best data centers elsewhere in the world. So we've sought to remove the fear factor around China. And this is the first building that you can see here, the first of 9 on this particular campus. And they're huge buildings, but international hyperscalers coming in who need to be able to assure themselves that they can comply with the cybersecurity laws of China. But very interestingly, in the US context, the Americans also need to worry about the national security law that they have in the United States. So ensuring that they're compliant with not only, when they're in China, the China requirement, but also the international requirement. And of course, for British businesses, that means the equivalent to GDPR, because if you're British, and that means it applies wherever you operate. And we need to be able to help organizations comply with both the local, but also the international. So for us, whether it's the international customers coming in, or increasingly the premium quality, some of the amazing Chinese businesses that want to come out and participate in the UK markets and the US markets, people like everybody knows about ByteDance and TikTok now, but the other ones like, for example, Kingsoft and uCloud and Kuaishou, and this wall of amazing entrepreneurial businesses that are coming through. The conclusion I think I've got on that is that we want to be working closely with international businesses to give assurances that it's good to do business in China, to work with the Chamber of Commerce to help people feel comfortable on the ground. But most importantly, satisfy that digital challenge. And if you like, that's the sort of the approach that we've got, and hopefully complementing, the expertise that Phil was touching on, and which I hope we're going to go into a bit more detail now, Phil. So keep an eye on my watch, because we've got a little longer that we've got to run through. But I think there'll be some questions that are coming through here. But where should we start, Phil? I mean, go on.
No, well, it's great to listen to everybody, right, talking about the opportunities in China. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to travel there for 18 months. But I'm here in Hong Kong, and there's a lot of talk in Hong Kong around the Greater Bay. right?
Yes.
There's a lot of talk here about the potential for business to leverage an opening up of the market, in essence, to some sort of similar structure between Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. And Stephen, this is a real question to you, because you're there in Beijing, right? And I talk to the chamber here in Hong Kong quite a bit, but what's the perception of the Greater Bay from I suppose, more from a mainland point of view?
Yeah, so I think definitely for those sitting in Hong Kong, this has been kind of the conversation, the opportunity that has dominated the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And again, I think the opportunities are enormous. You know, when you actually talk about what the Greater Bay is, we've talked about just the size of the market, but bringing Hong Kong into Shenzhen, Guangzhou, you know, and creating that as a technological hub to drive innovation, to drive R&D, to drive outbound, you know, businesses, but also just, you know, the amount of people that's there. So the opportunities for British businesses are vast, and that, you know, that's from everything from the built environment to the financial and professional services to education. You know, we're seeing some of the British international schools, you know, all open up down in Shenzhen, down in Guangzhou. So the opportunity is absolutely there, and it's absolutely vast. One of the things that has been a slight complaint for British businesses is opportunities, but what's actually the tangible business? What's the realities? And I think the Chinese government are extremely aware of that. In the last sort of 2 years, we've seen hundreds of government documents essentially opening up that market, looking for sort of provincial, but also sort of central reform to make that a really attractive base for investment, whether that be R&D, whether that be technological, and you know, that can be from everything from fintech to prop tech to ed tech. Any type of tech is essentially the opportunities down there. So I think, you know, the opportunities are real, and I think so. Maybe for flipping it, what's the biggest opportunities for British businesses? It's definitely in professional services, financial services. I mentioned in my presentation that there has been pilot zones down in the GBA, specifically with the liberalization of capital controls and capital cross-border controls to Hong Kong. So, you know, there are tangible, massive opportunities there right now. And so again, I think, you know, when we look at China, China does things on scale. You know, when we look at the Belt and Road previously in the last sort of 10 years, again, you know, the opportunities were there for British businesses. You've sometimes got to navigate it, but the opportunities are definitely there. And I think the GBA will only be a bigger priority for China moving forward. And I suppose it is almost a first mover advantage to be in the market, to be in Shenzhen, to be in Guangzhou, to be in Hong Kong. And I think the UK is actually pretty well positioned at a time like this to kind of capitalize on opportunities. But again, I would go back to being clear-eyed when you're going into China, into the mainland, to look for these opportunities. It is one of, if not the most competitive market, most dynamic market on the planet. And maybe this is a question for both you guys sitting up in Hong Kong. I mean, we've talked about the adaptability. You've talked about the product sometimes has to change coming into the China market. So I'd love to know what's your China strategy? Is it very different to other markets? I mean, we hear about in China for China, but I suppose from a commercial perspective, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, well, let me go first, right? Because I think you heard Chayora talking about their strategy. It's and with BT, we're in the international telecom game, right? The international infrastructure market, cybersecurity, defense, those sorts of things, and the needs are broad, right? The needs tend to be consistent wherever you are in the world. So our aim is to bring some sort of consistency, but also to deal with customers on a local basis, right? To make sure that we can talk to our customers in Mandarin, to help them deliver service locally and do what they need to do locally. But it's an interesting, where can we be successful? And I think the question may be slightly, I'll answer in a different way. I think that the sorts of customers that we're going after are the multinational customers as they establish themselves and they grow in China. So the customers that know BT, they know international telecoms, and they want to deal with someone that they trust, and they build upon that as they change their products and services to grow their business in China. And the flip side is we're very good and very keen to help Chinese business, the big Chinese businesses, and you mentioned ByteDance, right? Great example, as they go global. You know, we're in a good position to bring our knowledge of global operations to them, unlike some of the existing operators in China who are less experienced at that. So I think there's a strategy for everybody. To answer your question, you've got to be really, really clear what it is, because you can mess up on a grand scale as well as achieve and be very successful on a grand scale. So yeah, it's what makes it's what pays the bills and makes our life interesting.
I think those are all super valid points on that. I think one of the points I would emphasize, Stephen, is that what we've seen is that as an international business coming in, and actually as Chayora, we're not a British business, we're a Hong Kong headquartered business, but as an international business going into China, the extent to which the government is accessible and able and willing to support is profoundly impressive. I've worked with senior government city leaders in many parts of China over the last 20, 30 years. But in the last 10 years as Chayora, what we found is that you can't go into China and not be conscious of and fully aware of what the 14th five-year plan now is. So one of the things people need to do is understand that to succeed in China, you need to be helping China succeed. And I think that that kind of matching of intentions, I think, is a really important element. And when we were at the height of the worst part, I suppose, of the US-China kind of trade dispute over the last couple of years, we still had our friends in government who were calling up and saying, look, we've still got our foreign direct investment targets. We are really keen. We want you to understand that notwithstanding that there are macro political issues that need to be managed positively, we want to be looking beyond that. And China's always maintained this view into the long term. It's not just about the short term. And so I would concur totally with both of your points in terms of encouraging British businesses who have got the aspiration and willingness to be part of the world's largest online market, to be thinking about how to learn from both of your organizations and indeed ours as friends in the industry that can help people work out how to get in there. But I think you've got to be good for China for it to be good for your business. And the old days of when they used to refer to carpetbaggers coming in to try and run off with the spoils, China's a wise, clever environment, and alignment of interest is key in that area.
Well, maybe Oliver, just on that, you spoke a little bit about the macro geopolitical issues that maybe have died down slightly, but maybe looking at the Chayora pictures, that's an incredible investment into the country. I imagine extremely expensive. So how did you get that backing? Was there issues along the way, and I suppose what are the major risks that you faced?
Well, I think I'd be seeing my colleagues laughing in the aisles if I mentioned that it's only taken twice as long and cost twice as much as we thought it would. But actually, that's not bad. I think we set out originally to create environments that would both enable the international organizations who wanted to be part of the China digital revolution to be able to come into China and get things that they needed that weren't there. So we were seeking to bring international standards into China. We quite rapidly recognized that, of course, just as importantly for the leading domestic players who want a sound platform to take on the world, we needed to have product that was going to be just as good, but tailored to the China market. And therefore we do and are evolving a couple of different product styles, and they're both as good as each other, but they're just different because they, as Phil was saying, you need to understand the localization of it. But the thing that we have found is that there is significant international capital that recognizes the fundamentals of China. And the fundamentals of China, I think, Stephen, you identified them. 60%, I think you said, of China's population is middle class, wealthy spenders who are buying the same things and more that you buy in every leading market around the world. And, over the years, I think people got used to seeing, motor manufacturers, retailers, particularly the big branded retailers that you see in every shopping mall in every major city in China, the big Italian and the French and the British brands that are across there. This is a great market to be part of, but you've got to go in there and you've got to think on the right scale. So notwithstanding the short term, macro political issues, we are long-term investors in China. We're big believers in it as a market. And we had some research done recently that indicates that within as little as 4 years, by 2025, the total megawatts of data center capacity in China will have grown to being equivalent to what's in the United States today, and likely match up with the United States by about 2031. So, if you want a big market, a fast-growing market, that's why the money has come in to support what we're doing, and we're very appreciative of that, and wanting to turn it into good returns for our shareholders now. So, but that's a long answer to the question on that front. But
No, I think it's a good answer. I mean, again, obviously being based in Beijing, I've been out to the Tianjin site. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal, and I think the size will take people back. I guess then just, I mean, maybe one of my final questions to the both of you sitting in Hong Kong. I mean, I'm sitting in China. I know I've seen the phenomenal recovery of the economy on the back of COVID. One of the only G20 countries to produce positive GDP growth last year. So, I mean, moving forward, I mean, is China going to be top of the priority list for BT and Chayora moving forward, or is it, very much based on how the market develops?
Oh, look, I think anyone that ignores China, you put the stats up, right? Anyone that ignores China is ignoring a big opportunity. So we, like most businesses, we'll focus on where we think we've got the greatest opportunity. And at this point in time, China represents a very good opportunity for BT and business alike, right? So it was only last week I was presenting to our chief exec and our CFO about China and coming to them asking for more investment in China. And I think that that's consistent with an ambition that we have to grow China to. I just picked on a point which Oliver made. I think we go into China wanting to help businesses flourish in China. It helps the Chinese economy. It helps international trade. It helps those companies that are customers to do well as well. So I think it's win-win as long as we can manage some of those challenges that we spoke about, as long as we're across those, and that market entry is sufficient enough, and we're not held back by the need to create joint ventures and all those sorts of things in a restrictive way. Then I don't see why we're not going to be investing in China for the long term, as you are at Chayora. I think it's too good of an opportunity to miss.
And I sort of follow up. I think it's complex. I think most markets are complex in their own ways, but both BT and Chayora have succeeded in navigating through some of the technical complexities around licensing and elements like that, and that requires serious work to do that. But actually, for us as Chayora, is it going to be our number one market? I can confidently and explicitly say yes, on the grounds that we are solely focused on mainland China. And I've had some interesting comments from people who are saying, well, what happens when you've done China? And I'm thinking, well, when we've done China, I'll be long gone. I think doing China is a throwaway mark that you might mention when you're talking about one of the home counties back in the UK, for example, doing one location. But someone said, but what about India? And the parallels, of course, there's the same number of people. Why aren't you doing that market? Well, China's twice as big a market as India in terms of online presence at the present stage. China's complicated. I've worked in India. India is very complicated too. It's a different environment, and I think that what I think we are seeing is that just as Stephen, you put up the stats about the European Union's relationship with the UK. As you see the big blocks of China and India fulfilling their potential in business terms, the prospect for Britain, particularly in a post-Brexit world, to be carving its way into China in a greater degree, I mean, it's great to hear about the Australia trade agreement, but I didn't see Australia mentioned in being of any size in relative terms on your sheet that was up there. But let me just, so I hope that answers the question. Phil, for one for you perhaps, big challenge here. Representing and knowing some of your biggest customers are some of the big FMCG firms around the world and technology firms as well. There's some tough competition. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but to what extent do you think that the international firms are going into a fight they just can't win? Is there space in China for them to win? Because I think that's the interesting angle on this.
Look, there is, right? And I think Stephen touched on state-owned enterprises and the need to ensure a level playing field. State-owned enterprises can't fail in China, right? They're not going to be allowed to fail. They pay the pensions, and the economy is just too big. So the flip side of that is the economy itself is big enough and nimble enough, and I think advanced enough to make room for businesses that can genuinely bring some differentiation.
Yeah.
If you can differentiate yourself in a home market or a Chinese market, then the state-owned enterprises are a little bit slower, right? They're not going to react as fast, and there's headroom for you to create a marketplace for what it is you do. I don't think that's a massive issue. And look, there was one question somebody asked that talked about, well, are we seeing more and more online activity in China as a result of COVID? The answer to that is, well, so many things were online in China beforehand, right? China was so far advanced. E-commerce, you mentioned again, being the #1 e-commerce place in the world. Alibaba, JD.com. I mean, they're just massive, massive businesses that have created, I suppose, another marketplace, right? They've created something new, which, and I mentioned state-owned enterprises because I think that's where the crux of your question comes. How do you compete? In our instance, we partner with them, right? We're in a licensed, a more restrictive business. What we do in telecoms is it's critical to the Chinese. It's critical to everything I think that digital businesses want to do, and therefore we're regulated, right? We work hand in hand, and we will figure out where we can make money. And I think that's going to be the same for most people investing, right? You can figure it out. I mean,
it's just, if I can chip one in here, I remember going to the 2 or 3 years ago in our Beijing office, and I went out, first time I'd visited the office, and I went downstairs at lunchtime to try and buy some food in this amazing food court, which must have had 200 restaurants in it under in the shopping mall beneath the office. And I went downstairs, and I had cash, but that wasn't acceptable. There was not one restaurant in the whole of the 200 outlets that took cash, which was mind-boggling to me. Now, if I scroll forward, what's been particularly interesting, I mean, China for many years has operated using Alipay and Tencent Pay and all of the other telephone-based apps. What I've seen, I've spent a fair bit of time in New York in the course of the last 12 months between Hong Kong and New York, and all of a sudden, you suddenly start to notice that because cash is so grubby, and cash is something, if you're passing it from hand to hand in a shop, in New York, they'd suddenly moved to touchless payments. And you suddenly realize it's like coming from the 18th century into the 19th century and then into the 20th century. China's been on this for a long while. And I think, recognizing as a market, that just creates so many sub areas and opportunities, because in a big market, you don't need to be the market leader to have a very big business in China. And I think that's the opportunity I think people need to recognize. Is that something you see, Stephen, on that with some of the members as well? Because you've got a lot of members of the chamber.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we can touch upon that with our 70 years of experience collectively. But I think China's never been set up for offline. If anyone, I mean, I've been here for 10 years. I remember when I first come, you'd go to a shop and you'd maybe try to pay on card. There'd be about 10 different, card readers. It wasn't set up for offline. The vastness of the country, the different provinces. So actually, this is the perfect country for online. And I guess I think that also goes to the speed of this country. When I go back to, it's not the same as it was when it first opened up and reformed. It's not the same country as it was, at the start of WTO. And, when we even look at the new foreign investment law, which came out last year. It's a very, very different business environment. And maybe COVID has exacerbated the online, but you're right, it's been there for years. And this is the adoption of online is so dramatic here. I haven't used cash for 3 years. Everything's on your phone, and it's just easily adopted, from the entire country. So I think it's the willingness of the people as well to adapt in regards to change. I mean, change in other countries takes a very long time. In China, it happens overnight sometimes. And I think, that's sometimes that, can be translated to businesses. And, if you're a business that's, slow moving, shall we say, you've got to understand this is an extremely dynamic market that constantly evolves all the time. And you must do your due diligence on that, consistently.
I'd welcome a Chinese investment in the Hong Kong taxi situation with regards to cash. That's a long-standing thing.
Isn't that crazy? That is crazy, actually, here, because it's just cash. Yeah, gosh.
We probably know why, but there you go.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask Oliver, because we haven't seen each other in a while, but you're, what's the first thing you're going to do when you get back up to Beijing? What have you missed?
Well, that's
we're coming to the end, It's one of those
I think it's a great question. I think it's a great question. I think I was going back over my latest visa application, which I've been still unsuccessful on at the moment. 2019, I went in and out of China 40 times, 40. In 2020, I got one visit in January before it all shut. And since then, I've not been up into mainland China since. So one of the things I'm most excited about is our business has been growing significantly. And I know all these little square boxes who are called my colleagues on Zoom. And I'm looking forward to meeting them in person, because I don't know whether they're tall or short or what they'll be like in non-virtual reality. So I'm thoroughly looking forward to meeting our colleagues. And but I think I'm a big fan of Beijing. I like the state's, the kind of the state capital character of it and the boulevards. And I enjoy being in Beijing in the spring. Not so much the summer at the moment. It's a bit sweaty and can be polluted. But actually, I think there's great times of year when you can be up there. And it feels exciting to be part of a really, really important international capital. So for me, that's that. What about you, Phil?
Mine's duck in a little restaurant by the Forbidden City. That's a lot more. That's a lot more sort of
consumable, which is good on that. Now look, we're coming up to the finish. Stephen, what would you be say? What can you say maybe in some concluding points? What's your takeaway for people that have come in and come online to listen to us chatting this afternoon about business in China going forward?
Obviously, one of my purposes as the British Chamber is to support British businesses here in market, but also to promote trade and understanding between the country as well. So I think, post-Brexit, there's huge opportunities. Brexit, British businesses in China are completely insulated from Brexit. So it's never actually been an issue here. But, the opportunities cross-sector are vast. But again, I go back to you must do your due diligence to come into market. And I really do think that there is a very clear difference in reality to perception. And again, China is not all things bad. There is incredible things taking place here from the people, indeed to the business opportunities. So, my real clear message would be, this is a time for further engagement, further investment into China, and not a time. It would be a fundamental misstep if we were to pull back. And that's the British community, but the foreign community as well. So huge opportunity.
Right. And Phil, what's your takeaway for people on this?
Well, don't ask me to sum up after Stephen does such a good job. But that's probably my first one. But yeah, I think I'll just reiterate: if you understand the challenges, make sure that you partner with and execute around people that understand China as well, right? I think that to me is, you said it, Stephen, understand what you're going into and therefore set yourself up to overcome these challenges.
I think that's absolutely right. So I have nothing to add more on that other than to say that the British Chamber is there to support and help British businesses that want to come into China. Others of us who are associated as Brits or as British companies are always willing to take a call, because I think the camaraderie and, if you like, the citizenship that we can put together to help our colleagues, to succeed is something that overrides competitive instinct on that. So do reach out and speak to people on that front. And above all else, let's make sure that we're really focusing on what the opportunity is in each business. Look, an hour's flown by. I want to say a massive thank you to Stephen, to you, and for the presentation earlier. I thought it was terrific and really informative on that front. Phil, it's been great to have the chat at this end and share a few more things that we can go on and chat about now over a sort of a refreshing glass or two, after this session. But Stephen, we look forward to seeing you up in Beijing. Thank you to everybody who has come online and listened to us, and we really appreciate that. Do drop us a note if you want to find out anything more about any of our businesses. But with that, thank you to BT, thank you to British Chamber, and from Chayora, thanks very much for listening in as well. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.